This is On Frame here on ESPN 700. For the next 2 hours, we'll look at soccer from all angles and with guests you won't hear anywhere else. If it's happening in Major League Soccer or around the world, we will be tackling it here tonight. Now, your hosts of On Frame, Brian Dunseth and Trey Fitz-Gerald, right here on ESPN 700.
And we welcome you in, soccer fans, On Frame. James Rust alongside Brian Dunseth and Trey Fitz-Gerald. Happy to have you with us. And guys, why don't we just start with first things first, looking back at another trophy in the cabinet for Real Salt Lake, claiming their sixth straight Rocky Mountain Cup, knocking off the Colorado Rapids Saturday night at Rio Tinto Stadium by the score of 2-0. Trey, why don't you start us off, kind of your overall thoughts of Saturday night's performance?
Obviously, a big deal for RSL to come back home, get the full 3 points. Nothing better to bounce back from a 0-5 road loss to the league-leading San Jose Earthquakes than taking it out on your rival. I thought it was a solid effort, James, Dunny. Obviously, getting a third consecutive shutout at home, not giving up a goal at Rio Tinto Stadium in July is something that this team emphasized, wanted to get back to after giving up 5 in San Jose. I thought we could have, converted a few more chances. It was a dominant performance. I don't think I ever felt like the game was in question. Great work by Fabio Spindola to set up that first Sabo goal. A lot of people commenting it's probably the easiest goal Sabo's had in his entire soccer playing career, and then Sabo kind of returned the favor. Similar kind of work effort, Dunny, taking advantage of that Colorado back line and setting up Will Johnson.
Well, and I think you said it best. The fact that it was the third consecutive shutout at home, I think that's the difference maker right now for this group. The disappointment coming off of a big match in San Jose and a San Jose team right now that I think no one can argue is probably the sharpest team in the league overall throughout the first half of the 2012 season. But for Real Salt Lake coming in, I think they were a bit surprised when Jason Kreis wrote down the names that were starting for the Colorado Rapids. Pablo Mastroeni, he's long-term out and
right.
Questionable if he's going to be able to continue with his career after having a couple of head issues. You got Jeff Lorenowitz, who's suspended because of yellow card suspension. Connor Casey does not travel because of a hamstring issue. And then he keeps Brian Mullen and Omar Cummings on the bench. When he brought them off the bench, I thought we saw a spark in the lifeline of Colorado. They actually looked dangerous for about 10-15 minutes. But Real Salt Lake did incredibly well, especially considering the fact they were forced to substitute Jamison Olave out. Precautionary reasons, just making sure that he was okay. They bring in Kwame Watson-Sirabo, who was probably a little bit disappointed with his own personal play in San Jose. He comes in, Borchers immediately gets in his ear, and another shutout for Nick Raimondo, who now has climbed with that win into second place all-time in Major League Soccer.
Yeah, quite the accomplishment for goalkeeper Nick Raimondo. And the interesting thing about Nick, just night in, night out, very, very solid. And as he's been climbing the ranks, the funny thing is most goalkeepers who have the kind of success that he's experiencing are not vertically challenged, so to speak. Nick probably on the shorter end of most goalkeepers, but despite not having those few extra inches, dynamic in goal.
Well, and that's the one thing. You look at guys like Nick Raimondo, guys like John Bush, and it's what they lack in their physical stature in terms of height. They make up for width, cutting down angles, positioning, tactical awareness, staying connected. The ability to pass the ball under pressure back to Nick Raimondo and him to take that first touch, settle cleanly, and then play it, whip a long ball up over the top, take out multiple players. You can't downplay what Nick can do with his feet because it matches what he does in goal and coming up with those big saves. So another big one for Nick Raimondo, especially considering the fact that as a goalkeeper, when you get hung out to dry for 5 goals on the road, it's never a fun thing. And from an egotistical standpoint, I think that's something that will always weigh on a goalkeeper's mind when you get thumped like that. But Nick comes in, doesn't have to make a single save all night long. Good communication around the back line, and let's put a feather in the cap of Nat Borchers, because I think once again it shows how important he is tactically and from a communication standpoint to that back four.
Absolutely.
That's where I was going to go, Dunny, is talk a little bit about the difference that defense has when Borchers, who I think is the quarterback of that defense. He and Homison each make each other better. Homison has the athletic ability. He can be the eraser for any mistakes that are made by anybody. But Borchers is the quarterback. He's the tactician. He keeps everybody in the right spot. Obviously, Watson Cerbo missed that direction 2 weeks ago in San Jose. But having Borchers, Beltran, and Grabavoy back out on the pitch just settled everything down for this club.
Yeah, and not just having that back, but I think what we saw was a pretty incredible display from Yordani Alvarez, from a guy who doesn't get a lot of time because Kyle Beckerman is so consistent in his role as a starter in this organization, and very rarely do we see him suspended. It's just a fact. So when Yordani comes in and plays the way he does with having an incredible amount of experience in terms of training sessions and reserve league matches, but never really stepping on that field in the consistent starter role, for him to come in and play as well as he did, it's another great option for Jason Kreis. And for Borchers, listen, this is what Borchers has made his career out of. This is exactly what he does, and you cannot downplay his importance in terms of sorting things out in front of him, his communication, his ability. It's an art, it's a skill, and it's something that not a lot of defenders in this league have, is to visually recognize what you're dealing with and then verbally figure out a way to get it out quick enough to where you can squash a problem, where you can tuck players in and make sure defensively you're tight. It's a huge positive for Jason Kreis and for the back line.
Yeah, RSL getting back on track with the 2-0 victory, and then San Jose fell last night to Vancouver 2-1, meaning through 22 games played, San Jose still atop the Western Conference standing, 43 points, 13-5-4 is their record. But Real Salt Lake not quite as far back at this point, 39 points, just trailing by 4 points, a record of 12-7-3 through 22 games. So really still sitting in perfect position, no need to panic at this point by any means. But before we kind of set up the rest of the show, what we've got coming up over the next couple hours, I wanted to get your in-depth thoughts on the play of Alvaro Saborio. I think the man of the match, there was a number of different things. It was kind of an awkward moment when he scored the goal. I think the crowd wasn't sure what to do. Listening to the highlights of the TV broadcast, it was kind of awkward in that booth as it was in the radio broadcast. We weren't sure if it was a goal, what was going on, but Sabo gets the easy tap in. But really, it was his work rate that created so many other opportunities for Real Salt Lake throughout the night.
Yeah, and Sabo and Fabi both came out exerting a ton of high pressure on that back line. A little bit of a makeshift back line for Colorado with Marvell Wynn. It depends who you ask. A lot of people not a fan of him as a center back. Yes, he's got great speed, but he's lacking in some capacities, according to some, in the skill department. Drew Moore pushed out to the right. Tyrone Marshall, who only apparently starts against us. But Sabo and Fabi put a lot of pressure on that back line. Fabi created that goal. He chases down a weak back pass by Wynn, puts Pickens in no man's land. He tries to clear it, spins off of Fabi, and I think Sabo was trying to let the ball go in so that Fabi could get credit.
Or give it back to Fabi, and Fabi seemed to
and then it would have spun out of bounds had he not tapped it in.
Right.
It was kind of a skip. Everybody's hearts were skipping a beat. Even Will Johnson joking after the game that Sabo's got to just slam that home and worry about everybody else's feelings later. But again, like we talked about on that second goal, it's Sabo pressuring. I think it was Tyson Wall that plays a poor central pass to Marshall. Marshall gets eaten up by Sabo. He pokes it away. Johnson takes a touch and slams it home. And lo and behold, it's 2-0. But that high pressure, Dunny, talk about how important that is and how much that might have been missing in the previous few games.
Well, anytime you see the commitment from your forwards doing the defensive work, it motivates you, because not only tactically can you read the direction of the pass and the build-up, cut down angles, pressure the ball, pressure players checking to the ball, but it's also an emotional uplifting situation, because when you recognize that guys like Fabi and Sabo are going to put that kind of work rate in, behind them, when it's your job to step up, that you're going to match it. And it's a team mentality, and that really does play into what they were trying to accomplish on the field. I'll even go further back to that build-up. Matt Pickens pings a ball from his left side of his 18-yard box all the way to right back. Drew Moore, and this is what we've always been taught as defenders in Major League Soccer, that, or even going way back, I'd say maybe to the high school phase when you're starting to talk about tactics in terms of keeping possession of the ball and what direction you want to play. They always say, if you're not sure, height, width, and distance. As high as you can kick it because it gives you time to get underneath. Width allows players to get back centrally. And distance as far away from the goal as you possibly can. That's a utopia clearance, height, width, and distance. So when Drew Moore receives that ball, he's under pressure, and from Fabian, he comes streaking at him. Instead of just clipping one up the line, he goes back to Marvell Wynn. When he plays that ball to Marvell Wynn, it's not a bad ball per se, except Matt Pickens has still not slid over. He's still on the left-hand side of that 18-yard box. He's just walking. So for Marvell Wynn, without taking a look, he thinks, from experience, my goalkeeper is going to be behind me. I'm going to play to his right foot. It's going to be near the top of the 6-yard box, and he's going to clear it first time. But he plays that ball, and while it looks a bit soft, it's actually the perfectly weighted ball for a goalkeeper to clear. The problem is Matt Pickens just was on cruise control back centrally, and he didn't make it. He goes down hard for a tackle. Fabian chases that down, and then for Sabo, it's a tap-in. I never saw. I was watching both the assistant referee on the near side and I was watching the central referee, Silvio Petrescu. I knew he was going to count it. It was just a matter of when Sabo elected to knock it in. I think Sabo was waiting to see if Fabian could recover. But, in the 90th minute, it's the same type of play. Ball goes out to Tyson Wall on the left-hand side. He's got pressure coming at him from Will Johnson. Sabo's tucking in off the right shoulder of Tyrone. And once again, you've got an outside back playing a central ball to try to keep possession. When you're down a goal, it's the 90th minute. Why are you playing backwards? So for Tyrone, he's in no man's land. He's caught. The ball's played to in front of him on his right foot, not back to his left where his first touch should be, where if there's pressure, you can clear it. So it's decision-making. It's poor decision-making tactically from defenders in possession. You know where your teammates are. You've got to be able to take a look before you get the ball. And on top of that, you got to play to the right foot. And on both examples, they didn't play to the right foot. They put their team under an incredible amount of pressure, their own teammates. And, credit to Sabo on that pressure because what he does is, number one, he pressures. Number two, he doesn't commit a foul when Tyrone tries to just put his arms out and body out, gets a little toe poke. And then three, credit to Will Johnson because that's just a clinical, deadly finish, and that's exactly what you want.
Well, and we hear Nick Raimondo, Nat Borchers, Olave Beltran, Winger, all these guys all the time. When we give up 5 goals, they're the ones taking the heat. And they talk all the time about how this team, Jason Christ has been saying it for years, how this team is dependent on team defending, 11 people defending. And so those highlights from Friday night with Sabo and Fabi applying that pressure, Yordani Alvarez getting up high and winning balls, cutting off lanes. How many balls did he win in the first 20, 30 minutes of that game? He won at least 10. And he seemed calm and composed and all those things you talked about, Denny. So that's textbook example of team defending. And the interesting thing about Yordani, with Kyle Beckerman playing in the All-Star game, and we're going to talk a lot of All-Star stuff in the next segment with the folks from Philly, but that Wednesday night All-Star game, if Kyle starts or plays 45 against Chelsea or whatever and then flies back, and this game against Vancouver being Friday night, I wouldn't be at all surprised to see Yordani start again and have Kyle come off the bench.
And what's impressive about Yordani is just like Kyle, he's a ball winner, and he's so fluid in terms of his recovery of possession, his agility to get away from that immediate pressure of when opponents try to recover that ball, and then his decision-making, his vision. Very, very similar in terms of what Kyle brings to the table. And listen, I don't think RSL fans understand how fortunate we are to have Yordani Alvarez because I'll tell you what, if he wasn't at Real Salt Lake, he would have gotten his chance eventually. If it hadn't been on loan at the end of last season, he would have got his chance this season. But he would have been the same type of player that Osvaldo Alonso is in Seattle, that Kyle Beckerman is here at Real Salt Lake. There's very few players that can recover balls in a defensive midfielder, win those second challenges, not just the first, the second, and then have the quickness of train of thought in terms of getting the ball off their feet and keeping positive possession. I'm not talking, we always used to joke about with Pete Vinas when we were growing up, we called him pass back Pete, because every time he'd get the ball, he would go sideways or backwards. Yordani goes forwards, and that is an incredible quality to have.
Well, and when getting back to the Beltran back pass against L.A., which I was a little disappointed in the Deseret News article, which spent half the game story from Colorado talking about that. But, Tony beat himself up for saying, I had acres of space in front of me in an attacking position, and I still decided to play that ball back. And look, Donovan's ghosting behind Olave, and, it's just a very rare mistake that you see Tony make. But the reason that Wynn and Wall make those negative passes that you just described, Dunny, is because of the pressure that's being exerted
Absolutely.
by the RSL forwards and midfield. So
and on top of that, we almost saw Sabo pick off a back pass similar to the way that Tony's was picked off from Landon. And Sabo's been doing that for years here at RSL, is that he'll ghost on the inside shoulder of whichever center back is central. So if the ball's on the left-hand side, he will sit on that right shoulder of that left central defender. If it's on that right-hand side, he'll sit on the left shoulder of that right central defender. And so he'll kind of hide. So he'll let you say, all right, I'm going to look up. I don't have an option. Can't go centrally with the ball, so I'm going to go back. Sabo just kind of hides in behind. And I'm telling you what, he'll get one more great goal-scoring opportunity because of those little things that he does, because he's so smart in terms of recognizing when he can hold and when he can step defensively, but also when he can cheat a little bit, in the back line. And let's give credit also to Fabian, because that goal kick that skips all the way through. Yes, Fabian does not score, but think about this. Everyone was saying he's offside. You can't be offside on a goal kick, number one.
Right.
And the only way Fabian would have been offside when he was 25 yards behind the last man of Colorado in the attacking half is if Sabo touches that. And so for Colorado to not win that first header, to let it skip through and then be in a full recovery, that could have been their second huge mistake of the game that would have been lights out at around the 70th minute. So it was, these little things, these little game-changing moments and decisions that are being made over the course of 90 minutes against Colorado. That's what you would like to continue to see going down the line, and I think the bar is being set.
Yeah, it was nice to see Real Salt Lake be able to capitalize on the mistakes of Colorado, kind of reversing the roles. I mean, we've talked about it on this program a number of times, how many times teams have been... The mistakes that RSL have made, whether it be many or whether it be few, teams have capitalized on those mistakes. This time RSL was the victor, coming away with 2 goals on a couple of Colorado mistakes. We're off and rolling here on Frame. James Rust, Brian Dunseth, Trey Fitz-Gerald. Good program lined up for you. Coming up next, Jonathan Tannenwald. He's with Philly.com. We've got the All-Star game coming up, the MLS All-Stars versus Chelsea FC Wednesday night, PPL Park. We'll get his thoughts on that as Kyle Beckerman will make the trip east to basically where the Real Salt, he's the lone representative this week for Real Salt Lake, despite the fact they're sitting pretty in second place in the Western Conference. And then coming up a little bit later in the program, Peter Schaad of the Vancouver Whitecaps. He handles part of the broadcast team there. We'll get his thoughts. Vancouver, they'll be in town on Friday night at Rio Tinto Stadium. We're going to hop out to a quick break. On the other side, Jonathan Tannenwald of Philly.com right here on Frame on ESPN 700.
What makes This is On Frame, Utah's only soccer insider show on radio. Now back to the boys on ESPN 700.
And welcome back in On Frame. James Rust alongside Brian Dunseth and Trey Fitz-Gerald, talking all things soccer for 2 hours. We do it each week right here on ESPN 700, the home of Real Salt Lake. And
2 hours isn't enough, by the way.
2 hours not enough, according to Wiki Trey. Wanting more, always wanting more, never satisfied.
He's fighting the good fight, man. He's fighting the good fight.
I'll fight anyone.
Fair enough, fair enough. Big game coming up midweek. Not necessarily MLS regular season game. It would be the All-Star game. PPL Park is where things will be happening. Next up here on the program, Jonathan Tannenwald. He writes for Philly.com. Jonathan, welcome into the program.
Hey, fellas.
Jonathan, thanks for joining us. We just thought we'd tap into you. You're at the heartbeat of everything MLS All-Star. You've seen this game come together in Philadelphia. And I know, players, executives, Chelsea, everybody is just kind of arriving this morning. But kind of give us a sense of the scene there and the buzz and excitement for this game on Wednesday night.
Well, there's a definite buzz. You walk up and down the streets in Center City, and all the light poles have banners hawking the All-Star game, and it's really a sign that soccer has cracked it a little bit in this marketplace, where that's really hard to do when you consider how much competition there is for fans' attention, fans' money. You got Eagles training camp starting today, and that's a huge deal. So, it's definitely generating some buzz.
Yeah, it's been an incredible phenomenon what's gone on at PPO Park in terms of the support for the club. You've been up front and center with what's gone on from day one, from Nick being named to Peter Novak, the ups and downs, and now with John Hackworth being in charge of this young group of players. What's some of the biggest adjustments you've seen just in the recent term, since Peter was let go and Hack's kind of taken over and kind of tried to instill his own personal philosophy on this group?
Well, I don't think anybody in the locker room really wants to admit this, but I'll say it. They're a lot looser. They're a lot freer. They play a lot more attacking soccer. And I don't think they feel as worried about making a mistake anymore. So they just go out and they play better. They definitely struggle on Saturday in New York. But the games prior to that, they'd really found a rhythm, and they'd put the ball in the net quite a few times, which is what matters most.
A big player left out on Saturday in New York was Freddie Adu. Is there more to be made of this situation? I mean, it's a great signing bringing in Bakary Samari and possibly getting him into the lineup as quickly as possible, looking at that game on NBC against New England. But with Freddie and kind of the ups and downs he's had, 13 appearances, just 2 goals and an assist, relatively inconsistent throughout the course of 2012. Is this looking to be a bigger issue than possibly is being made out of it in the short term?
I disagree with you on one part of it, which is using goals as a measuring stick.
Okay.
He's not there to be a goal scorer. I don't think he's there to be a creator. And he's done plenty of creating. The problem is that the other guys on the team haven't always gotten on the end of the service. Now, as to why he didn't play Saturday, get out your dictionary and tell me what an internal team affair means. Because that's all the union has been willing to say, and perhaps they could do with a little more transparency on the matter. I heard that it was a violation of a team rule, but I still don't know which one. So the confusion of the situation isn't helping. And everybody wants to jump around and ask if he's going to be traded. John Hackworth adamantly insists that he will not be traded. I think he's done more good than bad on the team, but you have to look at it, as I said, in terms not just of scoring goals, but being a creator on the right side of the forward line in the 4-3-3, especially under Hackworth.
Do you think that because of the salary that he's making and because he came in and under the terms of the idea of working with Peter and Peter being the guy that has led him to the most success he's had in Major League Soccer earlier in his career, do you think that puts a bigger label on him or a bigger bullseye on his back, considering throughout the course? I'll take away the goals. I agree with you. As an attacking player, it's always difficult to judge him. 2 goals in 13 games, but only 1 assist. At the end of the day in Major League Soccer, when you're talking about those creative players, we're judging them based on the statistics, not just what they're creating in terms of wins and losses throughout the course of the season. So do you think because Freddie's on a pretty hefty sum that he becomes a bigger target for not only the media but for his teammates as well?
I haven't heard, at least in public, that many of his teammates say so many bad things about him. There are a lot of fans in Philadelphia who don't like the fact that Freddie Adu is making a lot of money and not filling up the box score every game. This is a working class town. They like hard-working guys who run a lot and appear to be contributing a lot. And I'll tell you, Sebastian Letou, as you guys know, was a fan favorite here. Absolutely adored. Probably the most popular player in team history. But last year, he didn't score a goal from open play until September. Now, he works his backside off, obviously. And there is a perception that Freddie Adu doesn't do that, and there's probably some truth to that. But you get that a little bit sometimes when you have a creative guy who's making that much money and there doesn't appear to be an impact. Could he be doing more? Absolutely. I'm not going to disagree with that. But I think that some of the criticizing him just based on the money is a symptom of this town. And it's not necessarily a good one.
Jonathan Tannenwald is our guest of Philly.com. Jonathan, let's turn our attention to Wednesday night's matchup. The Major League Soccer All-Stars taking on Chelsea, and I wanted to get your thoughts on the scheduling of this game. Now, for us locally, Real Salt Lake just came out of a match against Colorado, getting the 2-0 win. They've got a match on Friday night as the Vancouver Whitecaps come into Rio Tinto Stadium. Slammed in between, Wednesday night, the All-Star game. Our captain, Kyle Beckerman, will be there. Why don't we see an All-Star break like we see maybe in other sports like Major League Baseball and the NBA?
As will, by the way, the Vancouver Whitecaps captain, Demerit.
Absolutely.
I'm with you guys on having an All-Star break. They did it better this year. You guys might recall that there were some CONCACAF Champions League games the night before last year's All-Star game, which I believe knocked, Real Salt Lake, Seattle, and somebody else, all their players out of the game?
Yeah, I think it was Dallas as well. Brett Shea couldn't participate.
They made a point this year of getting the All-Star game out of the way of as much as they possibly could. But there's a point at which you can only do so much. And maybe it would have been easier if they weren't playing the game on Friday, but on Saturday or Sunday instead. I hear from a lot of people in a lot of different markets this whole trophies not friendlies thing. Why are we playing these medias friendlies in the middle of the summer? And what I tell them is, Chelsea's coming here anyway. AC Milan, Real Madrid, Manchester United, whatever the team, whatever the year, they're all coming here anyway. And they're going to make their money. And either MLS is going to get in on the action or they're not. I remember, I'm sure both of you guys do too, back in the early 2000s when the Champions World Tour started up.
Yep.
And we had, Barcelona playing Manchester United here in Philly to open Lincoln Financial Field, and there were a bunch of other games, and MLS wasn't involved at all. So the question then was, why isn't MLS involved? And now the question is, why is MLS involved? So, I guess that's an evolution. I guess it's a compliment to the fans that they've gotten to that point, but I think that there are some folks, especially in markets where there are not as much competition for attention as there is in Philly or Chicago or New York, where the perception's a little different than what the reality is in some place like where I am.
Yeah, and Jonathan, one of the things from the team side that we talk about is we don't want to give up a potential home weekend date for the All-Star game, unless we're hosting it, of course. But that's why one of the reasons from the team side why I don't think there's a longer break, because schedule congestion, as you just identified, is already an issue. We head off to Costa Rica on Sunday to kick off CONCACAF action next week. Tell us a little bit about your thoughts on the roster. Obviously, we're all following Kyle Beckerman, who comes from nearby Maryland, I guess. Jay Demerit's going to be on the show here later today as well to give us his perspective on a big Western Conference game Friday night. But talk a little bit about, I guess the LA Galaxy just announced that Beckham and Donovan will be making the trip, and they won't be staying in LA for the friendly against Tottenham.
Well, I was shocked when that announcement was made. And frankly, the one upside of it, I suppose, is that they could have announced that David Beckham was going to the Olympics. And they didn't do that. So I'd like to think that Beckham is going to be here. And look, I don't like this aspect of it. I know I've said a lot of very complimentary things about a lot of people in the last few minutes. Here's one thing that I don't like. And that is the lionization of David Beckham. That said, when I went to my colleagues at the office and said David Beckham's going to be in town, that got their attention faster than anybody else.
Yeah.
When you're looking at this group, one thing we're always talking about is as players or former players is it's incredibly difficult to get all of these different players on the same page in such a short amount of time, and we've seen it the last 2 years against Manchester United. is from the media's perspective, seeing what is considered the best of Major League Soccer go out and get hammered 2 years in a row by Man U. When you're coming into this season and it's in Philly, and you talked about that perspective of the Philly press and the fans, how difficult is it to kind of glaze over some of these recent results in terms of kind of promoting what could be one of the most interesting games, of the season in front of a fanatic Philly fan base?
I think the results are what they are. I think it's hard to compare from one year to another because the roster rules have changed so many times. But the thing that I look at on this team, as it's assembled now, is the potential for Kyle Beckerman and Osvaldo Alonso to be playing together in the center of midfield against Frank Lampard and Eden Hazard. And if those guys can get along, which for as much bad blood as there is between Real, Salt Lake, and Seattle, I suspect they can. That could be the core of a team that could actually put something together on Wednesday night. There are some hard-working guys in this team. You got Beckerman, you got Alonso, you got a guy like Eddie Johnson who's had just a fantastic season in Seattle. You got Chris Pontius from DC United, and of course Chris Wondolowski from San Jose. I'm not saying they're going to win. I don't think they're going to lose this one 5-0.
Jonathan, talk a little bit about the difficulties that Ben Olsen is going to have kind of forming this group into a cohesive unit against what is admittedly a preseason Chelsea.
Well, I don't think it's ever easy to do something like that on short notice, but I think that the cohesion, more than anywhere else, is going to come in the spine, the center of the back line, the center of midfield, and the forwards. And I think that means, again, that the spotlight's going to be on Beckerman and Alonso as the guys who are really going to be the key to how well this team plays.
Jonathan Tannenwald, Philly.com with us. Jonathan, last question for you before we cut you loose. The All-Star roster is what it is. Wanted to get your thoughts on maybe who got snubbed out of the group.
Boy, I think you have to say Andy Grunenbaum in Columbus was probably the biggest one. But an 18-man roster, you're probably not going to have 3 goalkeepers. A guy who I thought got snubbed, although he hasn't played all that well the last couple games, is Shane Williams, the right back for the Philly Union, who I think is one of the better right backs in the league. By and large, though, I mean, with an 18-man roster, it's hard. You could have taken half the team from Sporting Kansas City and half the team in Real Salt Lake and stopped right there. I think by and large, I'm good with this roster. You could say Javier Morales. You could say CJ Sapong. You could have said Danny Kovermans, but now he's out with an ACL injury. But there's not too many other guys who I would put in over the guys on the current squad.
Just one question quickly about Philadelphia. You guys went out and got Bakary Samari. It's a big move to kind of help shore up the defense. Hopefully that doesn't stunt the development of Amobi Okogu in the back. But with as much money as Philly as they've made public that they're kind of sitting on, that they've got a nice little war chest they've been protecting for a while, are there any other expectations in terms of signings as this transfer windows continue to be open?
Nick Sakevich says he's done tinkering. That was a quote he gave to the Delaware County Times a couple weeks ago after the Samari deal. There are a lot of very skeptical people in this town about the fact that they're sitting on that much money and not using it, especially when they didn't want to pay Sebastian Letou, they didn't want to pay Danny Mwanga. I don't know what they're going to do with that money, and I think there are a lot of people wondering if they're just going to keep sitting on it, and they're not very happy about it.
Jonathan, we appreciate you making time for us here in Salt Lake City. Enjoy the matchup on Wednesday night, and we'll catch up with you a little bit down the road.
Fellas, it's my pleasure.
All right.
Thanks very much, man.
There he is, Jonathan Tannenwald of Philly.com. We're going to hop out to a quick break. As mentioned earlier, Demerit of the Vancouver Whitecaps. Also, he'll be playing Wednesday night in that All-Star matchup. We'll catch up with him in a little bit, as well as Peter Schaad on the broadcast team with Vancouver. We'll dive into that matchup, which will be Friday night at Rio Tinto Stadium with the Wednesday night All-Star game, then Friday night before heading off to Costa Rica for CONCACAF. You're tuned in to On Frame. James Rust, Brian Dunseth, Trey Fitz-Gerald with you right here on your home of Real Salt Lake, ESPN 700.
If you missed the bill. You're listening to On Frame, the Soccer Insider Show. To join the program, call 877-353-0700. Now back to the boys on ESPN 700.
And welcome back in On Frame. James Rust, Brian Dunseth, Trey Fitz-Gerald with you. Glad to have you in on tonight's program. We just caught up with Jonathan Tannenwald of Philly.com as the Major League Soccer All-Star Game taking place Wednesday night at PPL Park. We asked his thoughts on some of the All-Star snubs. Let's kind of discuss, guys, some of the Real Salt Lake snubs. Is Kyle Beckerman really the only guy for Real Salt Lake making the trip to Philadelphia Wednesday night? Maybe a good thing because they got the quick turnaround for Vancouver, and then you've got CONCACAF right after that. But at the same time, I think, Dunny, and you can speak to this, guys like to be recognized for what they do out on the pitch.
And when you're looking at this, this roster, you can pick it apart. You can say, is Dan Kennedy and Jimmy Nielsen the two best goalkeepers in MLS? Can you say Aurelio Collins, one of the best center backs in MLS? Heath Pierce is injured, but is he really an all-star? Even if you want to get down to the nitty-gritty, Eddie Johnson, how is he an all-star? It's a great story that he's probably going to win MLS Comeback Player of the Year or something like that because he's done so well in a short amount of time. But, from a statistical standpoint, when you're looking at, all-star positioning, you've got to wonder why a guy like Kenny Cooper or, Alvaro Saborio are not involved. Even Will Bruin sitting on 10 goals as well. So, when you're looking to try to break things down and you're looking at the Real Salt Lake roster, right now for me, Sabo's the biggest one that's missing.
What about Olave?
I would say because of the injuries, that's why. I would say it's twofold. One, because nationally televised games are at a minimum this year for Real Salt Lake. Two, the injuries that he has sustained has meant that he's missed games, which I think in people's minds, they're looking for the constants as opposed to maybe what the quote-unquote best players are in this league.
And I feel like I'm seeing more props to Olave as the mid-season defender of the year. Brian Strauss, AOL, who I greatly respect, Soccer by Ivis, your buddy, things like that. But people that follow RSL a little more closely would say Homeson's a little off his game, whether it be injury, whether it be the Open Cup game, and some of the other games in which he struggled.
Yeah, and with, I would say with the exception of maybe there's a couple games where I've said Homeson Olave is back, and you can just tell because physically, even when he has some ailments, whether it's his calf, whether it's his knee, whether it's a muscle issue, Homeson has been able to kind of fight through things. This year, we're seeing mistakes across the back line as a group. And unfortunately, when you're a defender, you're the first one in the firing line when those mistakes are made.
It's like you talked about, 89 minutes, you can have a great game, but 1 minute you're the GOAT.
Absolutely.
Forwards, it's the complete opposite.
Complete opposite. And Homeson, I've watched him this year. I always watch him closely. People, for some reason, think I hate Homeson. I love Homeson. I think
you hate Real Salt Lake, right?
Yeah, Miles Joseph thinks so. But
Galaxy Homer
with Homeson, he's an incredibly physically talented beast of an athlete. And I think because we want to hold him at such a high level, when the mistakes are made, they're so uncharacteristic that not only is a mistake made, but a mistake's punished.
Okay, so, and I think this will make Jason Kreis's heart warm, which is there's the possibility on Wednesday they're going to name another 14 guys that are the quote-unquote inactive All-Stars, and this is a relic of the old East-West game. So in the players' union with the collective bargaining agreement, there have to be 32, I think my numbers are right, 32 All-Star bonuses given. So it'll be interesting to see who from Real Salt Lake, and I think they'll announce this on Wednesday before the game, who from Real Salt Lake might get one of those bonuses. Olave, Sabo, Fabi, Nick Ramondo's name has been mentioned. And again, Dunny, you bring up a great point, and it all comes back to this for me, and I apologize, but the lack of national TV, I think, may really skew people's perception. Shannon Williams is a perfect example. I mean, we had him in camp, and Jason was ready to get rid of him the first day. This was a couple preseasons ago. Now, he hadn't played. He was out of shape. But, I've seen games of Phillies where he's been lights out. And then you see other games like the other day where he can't, I know Philly, the end of the Novak era, they were moving him in the center. So it's funny just how varied people's perceptions of individual players are.
No, absolutely. And when I was, I've been keeping a close eye on Philly because I'm doing the game against New England on Sunday for NBC, and even watching that game in New York, specifically talking about Shannon Williams, it's an interesting group because when they do recover the ball in the midfield, they wait for their outside backs to push up, and then they look to include them in the possession and then look for that quality service. And in the second half alone, and I know it was hot and it was humid and it was, 3 games in 8 days for New York and a bit of a struggle, but the quality and the consistency, I think, was really lacking in that game. So, it is interesting. I fully expect Nick Raimondo and Sabo to be the 2 players right off the bat that are chosen for the All-Star team, the inactive All-Star team. And talking about that being a relic of the olden days, the East versus West, and naming these All-Stars, it means a lot. And while you're not on that roster, and it does suck, either you're not on the game day roster, you're not going to get to play. From a bonus perspective, I think what a lot of people have to remember is there's very few players that are making, that big money.
Right.
There's a handful of players in major. I can name one player specifically who's going to be able to retire from playing soccer, specifically in the United States. That's Landon Donovan. There's not another American-born player that's going to be able to do that. So, being named an All-Star in that second tier of groups, that's bonus money, and that's not only bonus money immediately, but usually that's a wraparound bonus money for the start of next season, where that goes into your base salary. So this is a huge honor to be named, number one, because it goes into the record books that you were an All-Star. But number two, financially, it's one of those things that can be a game changer, especially for these younger guys that are on these lower tiered salaries that are on the wrong side of $75,000.
Well, I think you just answered the question from our friend of the show, Francesco, who asked, do MLS players, do RSL players as well really care about being an All-Star? And I think that's where I talked about Jason Christ. He loves that. Guys being recognized, getting a little pocket change, and then but not having to go to Philly because 48 hours later we've got Vancouver coming to town and what is shaping up to be an absolutely critical 6-point Western Conference match, the first of 3 remaining games in the back half of the season between these 2 clubs.
And just to be clear, these type of All-Star accolades, they also, hurt. I don't want to say they hurt, but they force the club to kind of adjust things going forward as well. Because, looking at this year, we saw some significant movement for the first time. I use that in air quotes, significant movement. Robbie Russell traded to DC United. Colin Warner taken in the expansion draft. Gene Alexander moved. Andy Williams retiring. Rashawn McKenzie released. That have all gone on to play, with the exception of Andy. Obviously, he's with the club now. But because of players getting new contracts and other players hitting bonus money, and the fact that your salary cap only grows by 5% going into the 2012 season, that forced some tough decisions. So from a coach's perspective, like Jason, where it's better to not have my guys travel, and I'm happy for them and they get their money. From a general manager's perspective, it kind of changes the game a little bit because we always talk about Real Salt Lake being one of the few teams that, from a quote-unquote designated player standpoint, it's the unintentional designated player with Sabo, but realistically the rest of these guys are on a very similar pay scale. So a great honor, good opportunity for those accolades, but it can hurt you in some weird roundabout ways.
Yeah, and from the player's perspective, and I mean anyone can look at it, and a little more cash in the pocket's never a bad thing, but I think that's one area where people totally misunderstand, and that being the salary scale in Major League Soccer. You think professional sport, these guys are cashing in big time, and not really the case. I know when I first found out what the pay scale was, I was absolutely shocked. I mean, these guys are making less than a lot of people just out there in the workforce.
Well, listen, I was the second Project 40 player signed in Major League Soccer. That's now Generation Adidas. In 1997, when I signed that deal, it was $24,000 a year.
We joked with Taylor Twellman about this.
Yeah, and my paycheck in Boston, living in Massachusetts, $776.78 every 2 weeks, and that wasn't even enough for my rent. My rent was $800.
So why you hung out with the mobsters out in the North End?
I hung out with Walter Zenga quite a bit, and P.O. and all the guys down in the North End. It was fun.
Bagged groceries during the week.
But it's listen. At that point, I'm coming out of Cal State Fullerton. I wasn't on scholarship.
Right.
They paid for my books. I worked.
Did you open those books at Fullerton?
I did. I stayed eligible. My proudest moment about Fullerton, not only did I stay eligible, but I never had to go to study hall. So that's how well I did. It was
getting back to the All-Star game, talk a little bit about, I mean, we've talked about the bonuses, but talk about the opportunity to play against a Man U or a Chelsea and some of these, I mean, Kyle Beckerman's been around the block. He's been around the world now with the national team. So, his buzz that he gets for lining up against Lampard probably isn't what it is for a lot of guys.
Well, yes, but it's also an opportunity. I mean, you look at the guys that have that EPL experience. Jay Demerit, David Beckham, obviously, Landon Donovan, Thierry Henry, Eddie Johnson does for a little bit. But then you got guys that maybe have the opportunity to showcase themselves in a whole different realm. Aurelio Collin 2 years ago was playing in obscure Portuguese second league. Ramiro Corrales, it's a swan song for being a part of this league since 1996. But guys like Kyle, guys like Graham Zusi, guys like Osvaldo Alonso, guys like Chris Pontius have an opportunity to put themselves in the shop window, as well as Chris Wondolowski. Listen, Chris Wondolowski, with as many goals that he scored in the past 3 seasons, people are looking at him. Now, whether there's a risk to be taken, that's a whole nother ballgame. But remember, Robbie Rogers only qualified for like 16% of the national team games over the course of 2 years. He got a work permit for his transfer to Leeds. Chris Wondolowski, on the tear that he's on, when you have a guy like Jurgen Klinsmann that's going to write a report and write a letter of recommendation, that holds a lot of weight. So, you could see a lot of different opportunities. And remember, Osvaldo Alonso is a player that just got his American citizenship. It's another opportunity for him to showcase himself for the national team perspective. The same as Steven Betischer, and it's same with Chris Pontius. Guys that can showcase themselves at a different level against a different team to maybe kind of expand their horizons.
So the MLS All-Stars taking on Chelsea. That will be Wednesday night, 8:30 kickoff. You can catch the game on ESPN2. Hour number 1 of On Frame in the books. James Rust, Brian Dunseth, Trey Fitz-Gerald here with you on ESPN 700. On the other side, we're going to catch up with Vancouver Whitecap All-Star Jay Demerit. Vancouver will be in town on Friday night, and then coming up a little bit later in the program, Peter Schaad. He's at the broadcast with Vancouver. So we'll look ahead to the games coming up this weekend, get into some CONCACAF talk as well in hour number 2. That right here on ESPN 700.
Back to more soccer conversation on Frame here on your home of RSL, ESPN 700.
And welcome back in On Frame. James Rust, Brian Dunseth, Trey Fitz-Gerald here with you on ESPN 700 into hour number 2. And we'll look ahead to Friday night. Vancouver Whitecaps coming into Rio Tinto Stadium. And really, I think Vancouver, maybe the surprise of the Western Conference, really tearing it up, currently sitting in 3rd place behind San Jose and Real Salt Lake. And right now, we're lucky enough to be joined by Vancouver All-Star Jay Demerit. Jay, thanks for making time for us. Welcome into the program.
Of course. How you guys doing?
Doing well. Hey, Jay, thanks for joining us again today. I think you just landed in Philadelphia maybe an hour ago, but talk a little bit about what it means to you to be recognized as an all-star, to kind of come together with a group of players that includes our Kyle Beckerman and preparing to face Chelsea on Wednesday night.
Oh, well, again, to be kind of new to the MLS and to receive this, it is really a great honor to be voted in and to play with the amazing talent that now is filled in the MLS. And, last year was a little bit disappointing for me to be out a lot of the season with injury. And, to be healthy this year and to have the Whitecaps have more success, which obviously warrants more of our individual successes. You know, a lot of us wouldn't be here without our teammates. So first, you got to give credit to these guys, and it's kind of cool for me to be able to represent the Whitecaps for the first time ever. So, you know, it's always an honor, and really proud to be here.
Jay, well documented backstory to you and how your professional career has kind of taken place. When you made the decision coming back to Major League Soccer, you go to an expansion team with the Vancouver Whitecaps. Were you expecting it to be as difficult as it was in, say, the first year, where you've got a coach who gets fired halfway through, a GM that kind of comes down, takes over for a while, and then you have a new head coach named halfway through the season?
I suppose you don't really prepare for those types of things, but you know, I've said all along, I know what I've signed up for. You know, in year one when you got 25 guys that generally have never played together, it's going to be a little bit difficult. And you know, we've obviously chopped and changed a lot of players. We've changed our squad. We've changed our manager a couple times. But to get all that stuff out of the way in the first year and a half, and to see where we're at and see how far we've come, not only as you know, individual players, but as a collective club, it's really an amazing thing to be a part of. You know, and that's what I signed up for as well. We knew, and I knew it was going to be a process, and it still is. You know, by no means have we done it or gotten to where we want to go as far as the vision we have. But you know, for me, it was something about, you know, being able to be there from the beginning and to start from scratch in sports nowadays is such a rare thing. And I recognize that opportunity, and I suppose you recognize the vision of what we can make soccer in Vancouver. You know, soccer's an amazing soccer. I mean, Vancouver's an amazing soccer market. We got amazing fans. We're selling out stadiums, and we're just starting to become a better team and a good team. So, you know, the sky's the limit there, and you know, it's exciting. It's an exciting place to be.
You know, big risk was taken in the hiring of Martin Rennie in terms of his experience at the lower levels, but nothing at the Major League Soccer kind of quote unquote level. What has it been about him that's kind of changed this team from top to bottom, especially from a results standpoint?
Well, I think what Martin did in the beginning, when he first got here, was just shift the mentality. You know, when you had a squad of guys that didn't really know who their manager was, first they didn't know who their manager was going to be on a day-to-day basis. You know, and that's hard to have your leader not be that solidarity form that you need him to be. And Martin came in with a fresh approach, with a positive mentality, one that kind of said, listen, we're all doing this together. We're all here for the same reasons, with the same vision. And the only way we're ever going to get to that vision is if we do it together. You know, he's come in with a very open attitude. He comes in with a new school approach, with a good supporting cast around him, guys like Carl Robinson and Paul Ritchie, who have come into their assistant roles and done great. They both have a wealth of experience in the high levels of international football, in European football, and in the MLS. You know, and I think Martin, he understands that. And he understands that because he has come up from the lower leagues, he needs a good supporting cast along with his mentality that he brings. And so far he's got that combination right. And I think that's his number one. But ultimately what he does is he stays positive, and he continues to instill belief into our squad. And he has inherited a pretty good squad, in my honest opinion. There's a lot of guys that have come here. The club itself has done a great job of getting individuals that can play. And now he's just come in. He's shifted the mentality, and he's gotten us all to believe in him. And it's showing.
Jay, that kind of theme of belief is something Jason Kreis has instilled here in Salt Lake. Kind of somewhat of a similar situation, just a couple disastrous expansion seasons, a radical departure to kind of take your captain and make him head coach 4 or 5 games into a season, and Jason did a lot of the same things here that Martin, sounds like, along with your assistants and many others, is doing there. But that kind of belief and that pioneering spirit is something that's been emblematic of your career. And talk a little bit about the journey going from Wisconsin to England and moving from the pub leagues into the EPL after something we've all seen in the Demerit story, which I know is now on iTunes.
Yeah, well, the good thing is it's honestly sometimes good that it's been documented. I can just say, here, watch this. But it's for me it has. It's been a full spectrum journey and nothing. I don't regret 1 second of it. It's been an amazing ride so far, and to start where I had to start, and I suppose it is also a rare tale that I've actually probably seen the full spectrum of soccer, what it's like to play in 10th Division England all the way up to the Premiership or into the World Cup. So, for me, it's just been an amazing experience and on all those levels. I think I wouldn't be here without the beginning levels and the struggle that I had to go through and the lessons that I learned through that. So, I'm very proud of the way that I suppose my career has gone, but there's been a lot of ups and downs, but of course there's always bumps in the road, and I expected those. And now that the film has come out, and to see all the people that have kind of related to my story or have used it in their own lives, the emails and all the letters, or the people that have watched it and give reviews, or come to me, or the guys that have helped to get this film out there on Facebook or Twitter. And for me, that's been the most humbling thing about it, is to see how it can translate into other people's lives, because I love being that flag bearer of the person that is just like everyone else, and just try to use his good core values to go and try to achieve something that people didn't think were possible. And for me, that's what I'm most proud of, and it's been an amazing response, an amazing project to be a part of the whole documentary thing.
Jay, we were talking about this earlier, how difficult it can be for a group of players from around Major League Soccer to get together in a short amount of time, try to get on the same page, tactically understand that you're going up against a team like Chelsea, who's coming into preseason, is going to throw everything at you. But from a defender standpoint, and we know defensively it's one of the most difficult things to come together in a short amount of time with guys you've never played with. How are you preparing for a match like this? Because it's not only a great opportunity for yourself, but it's a great opportunity for young kids like Steven Betischer and guys like Osvaldo Alonso to put themselves in the shop window for possibly opportunities that are bigger than just Major League Soccer.
Oh, for sure, and I think we all take this game fairly serious. It is an exhibition game. It is something that we all should come and have a good time at. This is an All-Star week. We should take it as that. But I think you're definitely right in the fact that anytime you play a team like Chelsea of that quality, you're in a shop window, or you're in a window that people want to watch. And I think the biggest thing you can do as a team is to make sure we're on the same page. So Benny will have us in these next couple of days and preparing us in the right way. And I think there's enough experience down the team that can communicate and get the right messages across on the field. And then the rest is just making sure that we compete. Just like any game, if you've got 11 guys out there that are willing to work for each other and willing to compete, then those bridges can be built pretty quick. And I think that's what we're going to have to do to give ourselves a chance.
Jay Demerit with us here on Frame. A couple more minutes. He's an all-star defender for the Vancouver Whitecaps. He'll be in action Wednesday night as the MLS All-Stars take on Chelsea, and then he'll hop on a plane and make his way here to Rio Tinto Stadium in Sandy. Jay, let's look ahead to that Friday night matchup. A quick turnaround for you can often be tough, but just talk about the play of your guys right now coming into Friday, currently trailing Real Salt Lake in the standings, but it's not by much. So how important is Friday night's matchup?
Well, I think it's huge for both of us. This is the first time we've played Real Salt Lake, so we're looking forward to seeing what they have. Obviously, going to the Rio is a tough place to play, so we're definitely going to have to be ready for that. And we know how well that Real Salt Lake plays at home. So again, preparation is going to be key. The good thing about the rest of the squad is they got a good week this week with no midweek games, so they get a couple days off now to rest the bones, because we've had quite a few road games over the past month. So that'll be a positive on our side. And then ultimately right now we're playing some really good stuff against the Galaxy and yesterday against San Jose. But we'd had trouble kind of closing out games, and had been a little bit of inconsistencies. And I think for now, we just need to keep trying to tighten that screw a little bit. We've shown flashes that we can compete with some of the best teams in the league. Real Salt Lake being one of them throughout the past couple of years. And we just got to try to find that consistency, especially away from home. So it's another great test to see where we're at as a team. Every time our team comes together, especially with new guys, we added Kenny Miller and a few other guys this week. Lost Eric Astley, so we're still trying to build our team in the right way, but we're going to rely on guys to learn fast and in a hard place to play again, like the Rio. We're going to have to make sure that we're sticking together, because at this point in the season, this is when you need to start picking up steam if you're going to try to make the playoffs and then go into the postseason and have success.
Jay, Friday night's game, the first of 3 remaining matchups between the Whitecaps and RSL this year. What's your impression of this team? I mean, when we go to San Jose and lose 5-0, what kind of seed does that maybe plant in your mind? Is that a game you just kind of throw out in the larger scheme of things, or does it give you guys a little bit of sense that you can come in here and maybe get something done?
I don't think that's ever happened in the history of the league, has it? So, you can't read too much into that, because we know the quality that you guys have. But it also does prove that those things are possible. So anytime that you can see a team get beat like that, you have to gain confidence as a team to think that you can go and at least compete to try to score more goals or to give them trouble. You did have a man sent off as well. So again, the circumstances changed there. But, I think for us right now, it's about us. And the days that we come together and we play the way that we're capable of and do the right things. We got, Darren Maddox up front. He's a rookie and he's still learning. You got, Barry Robson, who's just coming to the team, and he's still starting to figure out the MLS. We got Kenny Miller now, who's starting to come in up top. So I think right now it's just about worrying with our consistencies and let the chips fall where they may. But, we do have the quality in the dressing room, and we've proved that now over the season a couple times that we can play with the best. And it's just a matter of continuing to believe that. And then you go into the Rio, and then you start to try to test it against the teams that have been there and done it now for years, and have the experience that Real Salt Lake has. So again, for us, it's just another good test to see where we're at.
Jay, a couple of big changes for you guys. Eric Astley traded to Toronto. Sebastian Letou goes to New York. But offensively, you guys bring in, like you said, Barry Robson. You got Kenny Miller, the emergence of Darren Maddox. How have you seen this group kind of transform? Because, Letou and Astley, some big players in terms of what they can do offensively when they're on their game. And now you bring in some established internationals that have a pretty incredible pedigree with Kenny Miller and Barry Robson.
Yeah, I think it's not as difficult sometimes when you replace quality with quality. And the good thing about Barry and Kenny is that they've played together for one. So hopefully that that connection is already there because they have had that before. And I think to lose Sebastian and to lose Eric, it's always going to hurt when you lose quality. But the good thing about the guys that we brought in, they seem to have the consistency that our team is built on. And you look at Eric and you look at Seba, both fantastic players, but this season they hadn't had the consistency we had asked. And I think that's part of the reason why they've moved on to their own different options. And now we brought in guys that have been built on their own consistency. So when you add those two guys and to what we're trying to build as a club and as a team, I think it could be a really positive move in the end.
Hey, Jay, we appreciate it so much. You making time for us here in Salt Lake. Good luck to you and the boys on Wednesday night, and we'll see you Friday night here at Rio Tinto Stadium.
Sounds good, guys. Take care.
Hey, Jay, don't kick Kyle on the plane flight to Salt Lake from Philly on Thursday, okay?
I know. I was thinking. At first, I thought Ramondo was here, so I was going to see if I could take them out after the game. But we'll see what happens.
All right, there he is. Appreciate it so much, Jay.
Okay, guys, take care.
Jay Demerit with us here on Frame. Big thanks to him, and quite a story. If you're not familiar with the Jay Demerit story, jump online to jaydemeritstory.com and check it out.
It's on iTunes now.
On iTunes as well, and just a phenomenal resilience, I guess you could say, is maybe a good word to put on him. Trey?
On Frame's on iTunes, too.
On Frame is on iTunes as well. Yes, absolutely. We are, we are just climbing in the rankings. That's what we do here on ESPN.
More downloads than the Bill O'Reilly Show.
Wow. Throwing that out there. The soccer fans are coming
They've
in
spoken.
droves.
They've spoken.
But not the golf show, apparently.
Whoa.
So.
We don't put that on iTunes. So, okay, enough with that. James Rust, Brian Dunseth, Trey Fitz-Gerald trying to throw in...
uncomfortable.
make things awkward for us here.
Fun. Come on.
We're going to take a break. That's what we'll do. We'll regroup. And coming up next... Is it coming up next, Trey?
Yes.
Okay. Peter Schaad from Vancouver. He's part of the broadcast. We got the player perspective. We'll get the broadcaster's perspective on Friday night's game as Vancouver comes into Rio Tinto Stadium. You're tuned into On Frame. James Rust, Brian Dunseth, and Trey Fitz-Gerald right here on ESPN 700.
Avoid. This is On Frame, Utah's only soccer insider show on radio. Now back to the boys on ESPN 700.
Welcome back in On Frame. James Rust, Brian Dunseth, Trey Fitz-Gerald with you talking soccer as we do each and every week. 2-hour program right here on ESPN 700. We just caught up with Jay Demerit, the all-star of the Vancouver Whitecaps. They'll be in town on Friday night. And staying on theme, we figured we'd catch up with Peter Schaad. He's the radio play-by-play voice of the aforementioned Whitecaps who come into town Friday night. They're right on the heels of Real Salt Lake in the Western Conference standings. 34 points to Real Salt Lake's 39 through 22 games, 9, 6, and 7. And we welcome him in now, Peter Schaad of the Vancouver Whitecaps. Peter, thanks for taking time for us.
Gentlemen, anytime. Nice chatting with you.
Peter, RSL and Vancouver are going to see each other 3 times in the next 90 days. Coming off that big win yesterday at home against San Jose, I think you guys may have served a little notice to the rest of the Western Conference that the Whitecaps are gelling at the right time, despite some high-profile moves getting Hossley and Cumiento out of there.
Yeah, it's a completely different culture all of a sudden here in Vancouver, and it was a decent team before those guys left, but I think it's a better team now. And the difference is that the current regime wants a group of guys who not only earn every penny that they make, but are extremely hardworking. And it's not to say that Cumiento or Hossley were not hardworking. Certainly Sebastian Letou is a hardworking player. But they just feel as though they've upped the soccer IQ a little bit. They've filled positions that they felt were not as well defined before, and the prime example of that is Dane Richards, who's been a revelation because the Whitecaps, since coming into this league, haven't had proper width, and Richards is showing that he can provide that. So it's a really interesting time for this team, and you mentioned gelling and hopefully peaking at the right time, and that's kind of what they're hoping for here. And I think there's still going to be some business at hand over the next week. But the goal is to get everybody integrated, get everybody ready so that the run into October is a successful one for this club. And that win over San Jose yesterday did prove that I think the Whitecaps can consider themselves up there with a shout if they do get into the playoffs.
We were talking to Jay a little bit earlier, and just kind of the evolution of this team over the past season. Watching your first head coach get fired. You've got Tommy Sohn coming down from the offices and taking over for a short amount of time, but yet Martin Rennie named head coach with plenty of games left in the season. It was a bit of an awkward first 12 months in Major League Soccer. What has Martin Rennie brought to the table that's been so different in terms of gelling this group together and still getting these positive results while kind of jettisoning out big names like Eric Hossley and Sebastian Letou and figuring out a way to bring in guys like Barry Robson and Kenny Miller who have that kind of history together on the field?
That's a great question, and Martin Rennie is an absolutely fascinating individual and a wonderful man too, and I admire him so greatly, and I want to try to glean as much from him as possible. First and foremost, here's a guy who was a player who ripped his knee to shreds and decided he was going to get his coaching badges early in his life while he had that time to sacrifice. And after he completed that, and he was one of the youngest guys to get his UEFA Pro, then he went into sales, and I believe he sold pharmaceuticals and software, and he became very good at it. And he wanted to try to find a way of marrying the corporate successful culture that he had in those careers with coaching. So then he comes to North America, which is a little less scrutiny for a guy trying to get his feet wet as a head coach, which is what he wanted from the beginning. And he starts with a team called the Cascade Surge and basically learns how to do everything from scratch. Everything involved in the club, had to go through him. Naming the mascot, doing the laundry, making sponsorship deals. He did all those things. And the one thing that he has put together consistently in every single team he's been in is a really laser-sharp focus of the types of players he wants, right down to sometimes how tall they are, how much they weigh, are they left-footed, right-footed, and what unique skill do they bring. And he likes having this ensemble cast, if you will, of very well-positioned players. And then the other aspect of Martin Rennie that is really, really fascinating is the psychological aspect and the psychology of sports. And he referred to the British Open the other day, and he said, there is a prime example of somebody who was thinking about the outcome before going through the process that was necessary. As it was a collapse rather than somebody coming on and winning the British Open. And so psychology is a major aspect of his repertoire, where he tries to get more out of a player than they think that they're capable of. And he's done it. He's reclaimed some players who had poor years last year and are completely reinvigorated. And it's all about being positive. And a little example, you guys, is, and I thought this was really fascinating for anybody who's interested in coaching, he never ever shows players in video sessions making mistakes. He'll show good things that happen. He'll show you making the right decisions on the field. When it comes down to mistakes, though, they'll simply go onto the training ground, they'll recreate it on the training ground, and correct it there. And that's just a little thing, but I did find that interesting because there are a lot of old school coaches that will sit you down and say, look at that. That is why we were scored against. You cost us that goal because of that poor decision. And that's just not in his style.
Peter, I don't know if you know, but our leader, Jason Christ, was a psychology major at Duke before he embarked on his professional playing career, and I think we probably see some similarities there. But how is Martin with the media and the broadcasters up there in Vancouver? Because I know there's a little bit of a fishbowl with the Whitecaps.
He's been absolutely amazing. I mean, I have a daily show, and he's on every week, for good 10 to 15 minutes, and then we have him on before the game, we have him on after the game. He's on after every training session with all the media, and he's been he's been a godsend for us without question because he is so articulate, he's so energetic, and Martin Rennie has said himself that the main thing that's missing from the game in North America is people calling in to sports talk radio and debating issues within soccer and criticizing and arguing and doing all those things they do overseas, which dominate the phone line.
And in Salt Lake,
right? And in Salt Lake, good. And that's really well. And your market is special. There's no question. But he says that's what's missing in North America by and large, whereas it's just so natural in North America. When that starts happening, when the game is on the radio more, and when issues are on the radio and debates are on the radio, he thinks that's when we're really going to see things take off here.
When you're looking at the acquisition, Barry Robson, 6 matches, he's got 2 goals, a couple from the spot. He's already made that instant impact. You talked about Dane Richards, and when you got pace like Richards has it can absolutely open up an opponent's defense. But with the breakout season that Darren Maddox has had, 6 goals in just 9 starts, where do you see his role kind of maybe evolving with the acquisition of Kenny Miller coming on and making his debut in those 12 minutes against San Jose?
Well, first and foremost, I think what Martin Rennie would like to see is for Darren Maddox to glean something off, a really professional 32-year-old who's scored at every level, at every competition, and for his country and everything. So, they've got a really nice blend of that, veterans along with young players. And I don't think Darren Maddox is going to see a lot of the bench down the stretch here. It will be interesting to see how much Kenny Miller either takes his minutes away, Maddox's minutes away, or if they could find a way of playing the two together because they are similar straight-ahead, center-forward type players. But what will be interesting down the road for me is just how much Darren can glean off Kenny and his runs, the types of movement he has, and also, like an example yesterday was holding up the ball when they really needed to kill the game off against San Jose, whereas they didn't manage to do that against the Galaxy because Maddox wasn't as an experienced outlet player as Miller is. Miller can get to space, hold the ball up, and make the right decision to kill 30 to a minute off the clock, which is what they did yesterday. So it will be very interesting to see, if there is some minutes coming away from Darren Maddox in favor of Kenny Miller. But I think ultimately in Darren Maddox's young career, I think he should be very thankful that he has a teammate with the experience of a Kenny Miller.
You guys have already blown the doors off in terms of points taken this year. Just 28 last year, 34 2012 so far. But what's been impressive to me for Vancouver is defensively, the additions that you've made, but also the fact that you've got a healthy Jay Demerit and the partnership in the back. Between he and Bonjour, 21 starts together. How important has that been to have that stability in front of Joe Cannon? With Cannon, he's got 8 shutouts on the season. He's lost a little bit of his mobility, but he can still come up with those big saves. But it just seems with Rochelle and Lee that you guys have become a much more stable group along the back line. And I got to give a little bit of credit to Jordan Harvey as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And any manager in the game will say that if he can have a stable back four that he can rely on, then he won't ever change it. And the amount of games that that group has been together is quite remarkable. And there were a couple of occasions where Schaad came as a defensive midfielder and Harvey played wide left. But for the most part, that back four has been, like you said, really, really stable. Martin Bonjour is a really interesting story because Martin Rennie has never, I think, acquired a player or recruited a player that he hadn't actually seen play. And Bonjour was basically picked up on a YouTube clip and on some very good advice from some scouts and some friends of Rennie. So, I mean, it was a bit of a gamble, but it's paid off beautifully. They complement each other extremely well. With Jay Demerit, Rick Celebrini, our head physio, who is an absolute guru, he's helped mend John Thorrington, who's had just a whole career filled with injuries, and now Jay Demerit as well. So he's reclaimed a couple of those guys, and that's been absolutely critical. But YP Lee I think he should be at the All-Star game, quite frankly.
He should.
He is, he's one of the best fullbacks in the entire league. He's been unbelievable, so calm, so elegant, such a fantastic touch on the guy, and can provide a little bit of offense, but is also very hard to beat one-on-one. So there's the backbone, there's the foundation of this team. And when Martin Rennie came in, the first thing he said is we were going to get our back four and our defensive shape settled first. It took about 5 or 6 weeks to get that sorted out. They got that, and from then they started to work on the attacking options, and that's exactly how it's gone this year. So, I mean, you bring up the point, 9 clean sheets for the team this year, compared to how many last year, very few. And then on the games where they have allowed goals, they have come in bunches too. There's been a lot where they've allowed 3 and in one case 4, and it's strange in that sense. But for the most part, they have been they've been probably the biggest reason for the Whitecaps' success in 2012.
You touched on a player that I'd like to pick your brain about, John Thorrington. I grew up with John and have known him since his days in the Man United Youth Academy. Where is he at in terms of his fitness? I know he's appeared in 11 matches so far this season. You talked about a tremendous talent whose career has been just derailed because of devastating injuries. At one point, he took a long walk away from the game down in Hermosa Beach. But with Thorrington, I just look at Vancouver and what you guys have done, and just looking at Johnny and his ability and what he brings to the table. If you got him on the field, I mean, you guys are going to be one of those teams that absolutely are vying for that top spot in the Western Conference.
John's a wonderful, wonderful individual. Another, cool head on old shoulders, and he's not that old. And so to have Rick Celebrini, work with him and basically change his movements, which was one of the problems. The thing about Celebrini, and he works with some of the biggest athletes in the world of all sports, and Steve Nash obviously was the one that kind of brought the two together. But what he does is he changes the movement that you have been carrying in your whole career, and he really gets to the root of the problem, not the symptomatic problems, but he gets to the root of the issues. And he's gotten to the root of John's, which was, I think, a lower back issue, if I'm not mistaken, and that created all sorts of problems. And when John Thornton has been in the squad, he's been one of their better players without question. He was getting closer. I thought he was possibly going to be in the 18 yesterday. I think it's probably more realistic that he'll be in the 18 in one of these two games against RSL. So he's getting very, very close, and to think that, he's there as cover or pushing for places, or if Martin Rennie wants to just freshen up the squad and get some fresh legs in there to put John Thornton in, that's a wonderful luxury to have, like you said. And the nice thing about John is, maybe the offensive and attacking part of his game isn't his strongest point, but he could still play in that role. He could play either of the two in the triangle with, the point guy being backwards, Davidson, or he could even play a holding midfield role as well. So he's a really nice little versatile player to have, and above all, he understands Major League Soccer and the demands in North America.
Peter Schaad, the radio play-by-play voice of Vancouver Whitecaps, with us. Last thing for you, Peter. Let's bring things full circle and look at this game specifically Friday night. You guys 2-2-2 through 6 games in July, obviously coming off the big win at home over San Jose. Well, it's documented. RSL's had some struggles as of late. They did bounce back with the 2-0 victory over their rival Colorado on Saturday. So how do you see this one playing out Friday night? A battle of 2 and 3 in the Western Conference Friday night at Rio Tinto Stadium.
Well, and what's interesting is if you said to me who's going to have more losses by July 23rd, the Whitecaps or Real Salt Lake, you'd think it'd be the Whitecaps. So it's been a funny little year for the group at Rio Tinto there, and I've watched them with great interest always because it's a first-class organization. I mean, we were absolutely blown away when we came there last year, and we can't wait to come back on the weekend. And we're glad that there's 2 occasions to visit Salt Lake too, which is it's such a perfect MLS city. But I don't know if I've seen a better performance by any team than what we saw in the first leg against Seattle in the playoffs. You talk about a team wiping another team off the map in a game. That was Real Salt Lake, and it was the style with which they did it. So I'm very shocked at where they're at this year. I thought they would be running away with the Western Conference, and especially the amount of points they've dropped at Rio Tinto Stadium is shocking to me. So that'll certainly be played in the dressing room prior to kickoff on Friday. That it hasn't been as much of a fortress this year. There's no reason to go in there being intimidated by the environment or the home team's record. And, I was also interested to see what would happen with Kyle Beckerman. I thought he might receive an extra game for what happened in the 5-0 whitewash with San Jose there, to see if he might even be playing on Friday, because he is such an important player. Obviously, you guys know that he is the conductor of that team. And neutralizing him and getting through that your rock-solid back line is going to be a big issue. But there's also weapons at RSL that the Whitecaps have to be aware of. But I don't think that they're going to go into this game on Friday with the mindset that they had last year in June or July or whatever it was, where really they were defeated before they even got in there just because of the club that RSL is at Rio Tinto.
I think we were all hoping that we'd see the referee's name, that he would no longer be in Major League Soccer after that 5-0 loss in San Jose.
Well, it's still, you can't touch a referee. We know that, and Kyle's been a naughty boy already once this year. So I thought that there might have been some supplemental discipline, and then of course he's got to go to the All-Star game, as does Jay Demerit, and that'll be an interesting little dynamic too, because they red-eyed it out there last night, and then they're going to have to head right back after the game on Wednesday. So we'll see what kind of spirits they're in. But what a tantalizing thing to have in July, 2 versus 3. 2 clubs that are, really good clubs, and in an environment like Rio Tinto Stadium. I cannot wait.
Peter, my last question before we let you go is, what matchup is the most enticing for you? Is it Saborio against Demerit? Is it Maddox against Olave? Which end of the field are you going to be watching more than the other?
I think it's Barry Robson, Kyle Beckerman, or a combination of Barry Robson, Gershon Kofi, Kyle Beckerman. And because, like I said, when Kyle Beckerman is running the show, we saw in the game there last year, what is so amazing about him is his ability to either hold the ball and avoid and evade that first tackle, which is really what you really need out of a central midfielder. But then he can release on a one-touch pass a through ball that sets up, in the case of last year, Gene Alexander, who scored the goal, which was just an absolutely amazing ball. When you broke it down in slow motion, he gets fed. He has one glance up, and it's a one-touch through ball, perfectly weighted, that sends his teammate through, scores the opening goal, and that's Kyle Beckerman right there. The best of both worlds. So, to me, that's the battle that has to be won for the Whitecaps, because I think Maddox will have a step on any defender he takes on, and Jay Demerit and Martin Bonjour have shown that they could shut down the best players in the league. It's going to be the battle of the midfield that matters on Friday.
Hey, Peter, we appreciate you making time for us here in Salt Lake City. Safe travels to you guys out to Rio Tinto Stadium, and we'll see you Friday night.
Can't wait to see you guys. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks, Pete. All right, there he is, Peter Schaad of the Vancouver radio broadcast. He's the play-by-play voice. It'll be a 7 o'clock kickoff from Rio Tinto Stadium on Friday night. 6 o'clock pregame. We'll have it all for you right here on your home of RSL ESPN 700. We're going to hop out to a quick break. On the other side, we'll put some finishing thoughts on the RSL Vancouver matchup for Friday and look ahead to CONCACAF. That starts immediately following the Whitecap game on Friday night. James Rust, Brian Dunseth, Trey Fitz-Gerald with you right here on Frame on ESPN 700.
If you're a fan... You're listening to On Frame, the Soccer Insider Show. To join the program, call 877-353-0700. Now back to the boys on ESPN 700.
And welcome back in On Frame. James Rust, Brian Dunseth, Trey Fitz-Gerald with you. Final segment here on ESPN 700. Glad to have you in with us. We've talked a lot about the Vancouver Whitecap game, which will be on Friday night. If you missed any of the interviews, Jay Demerit, Peter Schaad, they'll be up on the website. But, guys, immediately following Vancouver, the run of CONCACAF play begins as we travel to Costa Rica. And a lot of excitement surrounding that, Trey. You've been getting things ready, looking at the charter, all that good stuff. What can we look forward to with CONCACAF play this go-round?
Well, I think everybody's excited to go back to Costa Rica. And we've talked about this a little bit on the show, but getting a draw that had the Costa Rican champions and the Panamanian champions, you can feel a little hard done there. But I think the saving grace is we don't have to go to Tegucigalpa in Honduras or Nicaragua or El Salvador or Guatemala. So we've got a relatively easy trip, even though it's long, and we're able to go back and stay at the same hotel, train at the same field, eat the same food that we did for Saprissa. When we go to Panama in September, we're playing in the same stadium that we played Arbe Unido. So there's a lot of familiarity. So the team has a game, obviously, Friday night against Vancouver. Saturday will be a brief regen. Guys will probably go back to the stadium, enjoy Neil Diamond Saturday night. And then on Sunday morning, hop into a charter. It's a 7.5-hour travel day down to San Jose, Costa Rica. We'll have to refuel somewhere in South Texas. I'm not sure where that is yet. And then train on Monday, and then play the game on Tuesday. And Dunny, what are your thoughts on having ostensibly the toughest road game of your group? And remember, in a new format, there's no room for error. But you have it right off the bat against a Costa Rican team that hasn't started its season yet, and they're still putting the pieces together from last year.
It's exactly what you want. Absolutely what you want. You can say that you want that easy game to get it out of the way, get that 3 points, get the confidence, get that one travel game out of the way, but you don't want to have to be looking at a must-win situation further down the line against a team that's arguably one of the better teams in Costa Rica. The one positive now is that when you're in Costa Rica, you're looking at a much different venue than it was at Estadio Ricardo Saprissa. It's not going to be on top of you. It's not going to be as tight. The artificial surface is not going to be like you're playing in a parking lot with somebody's baby's blanket in the way. I've played there. That's where I played my last professional game. It's one of the most difficult places to play. So now you're playing in the National Stadium. And on top of that, your bus ride is maybe a 5-minute bus ride from the hotel as opposed to a 45-minute bus ride where you're driving through the middle of traffic on a packed weekday and you've got multiple police motorcyclists running people off the road and accidents happening around you. So from RSL's perspective, you got the familiarity. You've got the same training fields. You're going to have essentially the same food, the same staff, the same place. It's going to be very smooth in terms of the transition. The big question is Bill Riley going to delay takeoff and landing once again? for the second time. I think Jason still has a spur somewhere underneath him on that one.
Valid question. They'll probably give him some kind of chaperone, I would imagine, to make sure all the paperwork is taken care of.
We might have to give him a roommate on this trip just to keep him.
The worst part about that, like Jason
cheese.
and the team complains. For me, I was coming back and I had to go from. When I caught the flight, I was coming from Toronto, so I had to they had to pick me up and then sprint out, and Trey and I were the last ones on the plane. So I was getting a ton of stick. So for Bill, he lost one piece of paper, and he delayed takeoff for 2 hours.
Awesome.
And on top of that,
plane fills up with flies.
I had 4 hours to make my commercial flight to Denver coming back, and I barely made it. And Bill's like, well, hey, it wasn't my fault. So it's just great that Jason continues to give it to him.
On a more serious note, what do we know about Herediano?
Not much. Obviously the champion last year.
Based
in
on
the
their
final
first
phase.
half performance, based on their Apertura performance.
In the final phase of the Apertura, the wheels kind of fell off. They found themselves, like many teams in Central America, because of the financial situation, they got themselves in a little bit of trouble. They don't have a huge home stadium that could continually draw and sell out and make a lot of money. So when you're going out and you're risking the purchases of kind of big name players and established veterans at the end of their career, you run that risk. Do you win now and qualify for tournaments later that you might not have them? That's exactly what Herediano's kind of in for right now. So a lot of players going out, not a lot of players coming in, a lot of question marks. So Jason Kreis and company, they're going to have to do their research, and it's going to be a lot of YouTube videos, and it's going to be a lot of word of mouth, and I think they're going to lean hard on Sabo to try to find as much information as he can by kind of reaching out to his buddies that are on the opposing teams in Costa Rica to see what they can find out about this group.
That game will be a week from tomorrow night. It's a Tuesday night kickoff in Costa Rica. Brian Dunseth, Bill Riley going to be with you on that one?
No, I'm actually not traveling. I'll be in L.A. doing the game for Fox Soccer, so we'll be doing the games from the L.A. studios.
So gotcha. Bill and I will do a special on frame next Monday from Costa Rica, so can't wait for that. But
allegedly.
Getting back to this week, James, I think the fans want to know what's the RSL 11 going to look like
Absolutely.
on Friday, and I think it's going to look a lot like what we just saw against Colorado. I think the injury situation is clearing up. Chris Schuler is making progress. They're still seeing some issues on the bone scan, but again, the idea is to get him 100% before he gets on the ball so that he doesn't become susceptible to future injury. Beckerman's going to be coming off of, I imagine at least a 45-minute performance against Chelsea. So I think he'll play against Vancouver Friday night, but may not start. Again, it's all about being 100% next Tuesday in Costa Rica.
Well, and remember, for Ben Olsen, he doesn't have to adhere to that starting 11 that was initially named.
Right.
So he's going to put his best team together. And, like we heard earlier, there's a good opportunity that Ozzie Alonso and Kyle Beckerman are going to be starting together. I would not be surprised if there were two defensive midfielders sitting in front of a back four, and then you essentially play with four free players, two forwards and two creative midfielders, and let Kyle and Ozzie do the dirty work. Question is, will they end up tackling each other halfway through instead of tackling the opponent?
And then Jameson Olave's injury, look, he's dealt with a lot of nagging things in his calf and his knee and his groin and his hamstring, all that kind of stuff. When he was taken out in the 62nd minute Saturday night, Jason and the trainers told me it was precautionary. He did take a little bit of a knock in the hamstring, but it wouldn't have kept him out if the game was sort of in balance. And no disrespect to Colorado, but I think Jason's also looking at, let's get Jameson off, give him the opportunity to be closer to 100% Friday and then Tuesday, and then let's give Kwame Watson-Sirbo a half hour next to Nat Borchers and maybe get that taste of that San Jose game out of his mouth as well.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think it's a huge confidence-building point for Kwame to make sure he comes in, because as a center back, you don't want to be that substitute. It's hard to get into the rhythm of the game, not only the pace of the game, but the movement, sticking with those runs. You got fresh legs, but it's just a different dynamic. So for Kwame, that's exactly what you want to see, him coming in and a positive result and kind of building that confidence back up.
Denny, I wanted to get your thoughts on this quickly as we kind of wind down here. Many of us, I think, thought we'd possibly see Justin Braun on Saturday night. when the substitution was made, Fabian Espindola coming off, Johnny Steele was the replacement for Fabi. Were you surprised by that? When maybe can we expect to see Justin Braun on the pitch?
Well, I think it's a good question, and I absolutely understand why that question was had. Think about this: when you take Fabian off, you take away the risk of losing him.
Right.
At that point, it started to get contentious.
And he didn't stay on the bench because I think he was going to explode at either the fourth or the center.
He went right into the locker room.
And here's the way to look at it from Jason's perspective. You got Javier sitting underneath. If you take Fabian off, you put Javi higher, and you bring in Johnny Steele with fresh legs, high work rate, he's going to do a lot of the dirty work. Now you essentially have 4 players with the same train of mind in terms of work rate, slow it down, great possession, and you freed Javi up to play a little bit of a hybrid underneath Sabo, but a much different look. So it changes not only the look of your team, but it changes defensively how Colorado is forced to play. Fresh legs in the midfield always hurt. I was surprised because I thought that Jason, in terms of time wasting, might have taken off Sabo right away after the Will Johnson goal, killed it off, and then got Justin, his debut. What you would like to see aesthetically, and I'm not in Jason's mind, is that you would like to see Justin come in a situation that's a win-win situation, get that debut out of his way, get him a few early touches, maybe get him 10 minutes. But, we'll see. Jason's he's going with the tried and trusted right now, as opposed to guys that he's still becoming familiar with. And there's got to be a trust. There's got to be that bond to understand that I can take Sabo off, and when I do, I'm not going to lose a lot by bringing Justin on.
And Johnny Steele picked up a yellow card. He will not be available on Friday night. That's going to do it for us here on Frame. For Dunny, for Trey, for our producer Trevor, I've been your host, James Rust. We'll catch you Friday night right here on ESPN 700 RSL and Vancouver.